Using a 19mm socket, we'll go ahead and remove the lug nuts. Once these are all off, we'll take the wheel off.
I want to go ahead and turn this wheel this way here so we can get better access. I'm going to go ahead and remove the two large 21mm bolts for the entire brake unit, especially for the caliper bracket. There's one on the top, one on the bottom. Once that bolt comes out, you want to be prepared to grab that caliper and bracket. I'm going to pull it off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and hang this off the upper control arm. Go ahead and remove the brake rotor, set that aside. Using a 36mm socket, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the axle nut. Using a 21mm socket, we want to go ahead and loosen the upper ball joint nut. I'm going to thread that down, but we're not going to remove it. We're going to leave it attached, so there's just a little bit of a fingertip's width in between there. I'm going to reposition the knuckle, bring this around. I'm now going to go ahead and remove this cotter pin from the outer tie rod end. We're going to go ahead and remove the nut from the tie rod end. Using a hammer, we're going to go ahead and strike the side of the knuckle to release this tie rod end. We'll go ahead and pull that and set that aside. For ease of getting around, I'm going to go ahead and use a bungee cord to go ahead and support this tie rod end up out of the way. We're now going to go ahead and remove the lower ball joint nut on the bottom of the knuckle. I'm going to use a 21mm socket for that. Now the upper ball joint is loose. We're going to remove the nut the rest of the way. And then go ahead and remove that nut. Set that nut aside. Now what we want to do is raise that upper control arm and separate it from the knuckle. Now we can't pull the CV axle out yet because we just don't have enough of room for the knuckle to swing out. What we're going to do is we're going to tap on the bottom of this ball joint here to get it out of the lower control arm. When this comes out of the control arm, we'll then be able to go ahead and pull the axle out of the knuckle as we separate it from the vehicle. So we want to go ahead and get this ball joint removed from the knuckle itself. You can clearly see that there is some rust buildup on here. So we're going to start by generously applying some rust penetrant. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cut the threaded portion of this ball joint off so we can go ahead and get our ball joint removal tool installed. So we're just going to cut it right where the threads meets the tapered portion. Now inside the surface here where the ball joint was, we're just going to take a little bit of sandpaper. We're just going to kind of clean up any rusty garbage that's in here. Just going to make it easier for the new ball joint to press into it. I'm going to go ahead and set the ball joint in. I'm going to put our kit together here. Before we reinstall the knuckle, I want to go ahead and clean the lower portion here of the control arm. I'm going to wipe that down, make sure there's no garbage in that's going to cause any resistance. Now what we're going to do is take the CV axle, and at the same time, we're going to join the CV axle into the hub, as well as getting that lower ball joint into the control arm. Good, and work that CV axle so that the splines line up and come through the hub. At this point here, we can go ahead and take the upper control arm and pop that through the knuckle. Let's go ahead and take the upper ball joint nut. Gonna go ahead and get that started, a few threads. I like to spin them on as far as I can by hand. And I'm gonna go ahead and take the nut for the bottom ball joint and get that started. You wanna go ahead and get the lower nut put on the lower ball joint. What I want you to notice is that the old one had a castle nut that we had a cotter pin on. You may receive something like this that has a lock ring. It's a lock nut that does not require a cotter pin. I'll go ahead, spin that on. Let's go ahead and tighten up that lower ball joint nut. I'm going to go ahead and torque the upper ball joint to 60 foot-pounds. And do the same for the bottom. Now I'm going to go ahead and release this bungee here. Take that off, set that aside. And I'm going to go ahead and reconnect our tie rod. Get the tie rod nut started. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down. Then we're going to go ahead and torque it to 80 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and put on your axle nut washer and put on the axle nut. We're going to go ahead and tighten up that axle nut. And then we're going to go ahead and torque it to 100 foot-pounds. So when we go to torque this axle nut, the whole hub is going to spin. What we're going to do is we're going to throw on 2 of the lug nuts.
Spin them down as far as you can. We're going to go ahead and throw a pry bar in between here while we go to torque this. Let's go ahead and set your brake rotor on and slide that on. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab the brake caliper, remove it from our hanger. We're going to press that rotor in and slide the caliper and pads back into place. Feed one of the bolts through the back of the knuckle. And we'll get that started a few threads. Once that's caught, I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the bottom. I'm going to grab the component and pull it off to the side so we'll be able to get better access to those bolts to tighten them up. Let's go ahead and torque the brake caliper bolt to 100 foot-pounds. And do the same for the upper. Now let's go ahead and get the wheel put back on. Always want to get all the lug nuts started by hand, never by power tools. This will prevent you from cross threading. And once these are on, we can then use a power tool to snug those down. Now with the vehicle lowered and the tire on the ground, we can now go ahead and torque these to 95 foot-pounds. I'm going to do this in a star pattern.